There are people who walk into a room and, within minutes, already know what others are hiding. They see the man laughing the loudest at the table, yet recognize it as the laughter of someone trying to fill an inner void. They hear the words, "I'm fine," and instantly know it's coming from someone too exhausted to explain that they are not. They look into someone's eyes and perceive what has never been spoken aloud, and most of the time, they say nothing. They simply sit there, carrying truths no one asked them to hold, in a world performing a play whose script they have long since understood. People often call this strong intuition or high emotional intelligence. It sounds like a compliment, but if you are someone who lives with this ability every day, you know better than anyone that it is not as light as it sounds, because seeing through others does not just mean you perceive more. It means you feel more, carry more, and become exhausted in ways you don't know how to explain to anyone. But here is what most people overlook when they talk about this. The ability to read others at that level is not random. The brain does not become that sensitive without a reason. And in most cases, that reason is not a gift. It is something shaped in an environment where reading the people around you was not a social skill, but the only way to feel safe. That is the true beginning of this story, and that is what we are going to explore today. Neuroscience has a concept called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself based on the environment it is exposed to. And one of the clearest examples of this process is what happens to the brain of a child who grows up in an emotionally unstable environment. When a child cannot predict the moods of the people around them, when they don't know which version of their parents they will encounter when they get home, or whether a simple comment will be received calmly or met with a negative reaction, their brain does not wait. It begins to learn. It learns to constantly scan the environment, to detect the smallest signals in tone of voice, in facial expressions, in body language, in order to anticipate what is about to happen before it happens. Not because that child is more intelligent than others, but because for them, reading people is not a choice. It is a survival mechanism. And this is the critical point. What is practiced long enough in childhood does not disappear in adulthood. It becomes the default way the nervous system processes the world. A child who once had to read their parents' emotional states to know when to stay quiet, when to speak, when to disappear, that child grows into an adult who can walk into a room and within minutes sense who is tense, who is pretending, and who is hiding something. From the outside, it looks like a superpower, but from the inside, it is something entirely different. Because that nervous system does not know how to distinguish between a truly dangerous environment and a normal work meeting. It does not know how to switch off when it is no longer needed. It keeps scanning, keeps analyzing, keeps collecting data even when you are having dinner with close friends, even when you are in a healthy relationship, even when there is no threat present. Because for that nervous system, vigilance is not a response to danger, it is the baseline state. And that is why these individuals become exhausted in ways that are difficult for others to understand. Not because their lives are objectively harder, but because their brains never truly rest even when the body lies down, even when nothing is happening. A part of the nervous system is still working, still watching, still analyzing, still preparing for a threat that may never come. This is not personality. This is the imprint of a child who had to grow up too early in a way that no one saw, and that they themselves never learned how to name. Most people think that the ability to read others helps you build better relationships, and in theory, that is true. But in reality, it often unfolds in the exact opposite direction. The more clearly you see others, the lonelier you tend to become. Not because you don't want connection, but because that ability gradually turns into a transparent barrier between you and the world. You can see everything clearly, yet you cannot fully touch anything. Consider what happens in a situation that seems completely ordinary. They are sitting at a close friend's birthday party. Music is playing, drinks are flowing, everyone is laughing, but they are not truly there. Their eyes are fixed on that friend, the one laughing the loudest, the center of attention, and they notice what no one else does. The smile doesn't reach the eyes. The laughter is slightly higher than usual, just enough to reveal someone trying to fill an inner void. And every time someone steps away from the conversation, that friend's eyes flicker with a brief trace of anxiety before it is quickly covered by another joke. They know that friend is not okay. They know it clearly, with certainty, without needing to ask. But they say nothing, because they also know that if they ask right now, in the middle of the party, that friend will deny it. And if they tell others at the table, no one will believe them. They will be seen as someone trying to ruin the mood. So they sit there, smiling, raising a glass, carrying a truth no one asked them to hold. This is the weight that outsiders never see. But the real cost goes far beyond silence. It reaches into the very relationships they value most. Look at what happens when they try to truly love someone. They meet a person who makes them feel safer than usual. Someone genuine, consistent, with no obvious signs of pretense. And that is exactly when things become most complicated. Because when the other person says, "I miss you," after a day apart instead of feeling warmth, a part of their mind immediately begins to analyze. Why now? Did something happen? They didn't usually text like this before. What changed? They don't choose to do this. They don't want to do this. But a nervous system trained to detect inconsistency operates automatically, and unexpected care, to such a system, is processed no differently than a signal that needs to be verified. The other person has no idea this is happening. They only see that the person they love sometimes becomes strangely distant, sometimes responds indifferently to gestures of care, sometimes seems mentally elsewhere in the middle of a conversation, and they begin to wonder, am I doing something wrong? This is where the cycle fully closes. The person who can read others most deeply is unintentionally hurting the one person they truly want to be close to, not because they don't care, but because their nervous system has not learned to distinguish between real threat and real safety, and the other person, no matter how sincere, cannot break through that wall because it is not built from coldness or indifference. It is built from the fear of someone who has been hurt too many times to fully trust anything again, and so they continue living in a cruel paradox, understanding others more deeply than anyone else, yet unable to let anyone truly understand them, offering empathy as naturally as breathing, yet not knowing how to receive it without feeling unsafe, connecting with others just enough to avoid complete isolation, but never deeply enough to feel that they truly belong. This is not a choice. It is the consequence of a nervous system that learned to survive by observing instead of trusting, and was never taught that sometimes letting go of control is the only thing that can truly save you. There is a question that most people do not dare to ask when discussing this topic, not because it is difficult to answer, but because it touches something those with this ability do not want to face about themselves. The question is, at what point does what you call sharp perception become nothing more than fear, dressed up in a more appealing name? This is not a question meant to judge. It is the most important question for those who live with this ability, because the line between the two is far thinner than people assume, and the cost of not recognizing that line can last a lifetime. Consider a specific situation. They are working in a new project team. There is a colleague friendly, cheerful, always willing to help. To most people in the group, this person is a source of positivity in the office. But for them, from the very first week, something feels off. The friendliness is too consistent, too uniform, without a single moment that feels natural. The smile appears a bit too quickly. Agreement in meetings comes a bit too easily. They begin to observe more closely, then even more closely. They notice every small detail in how this person interacts with the boss, compared to how they interact with those below them. They start interpreting every statement, every email, every gesture, as pieces of a larger picture that only they can see. And in their mind, a conclusion slowly forms that this person is hiding something, manipulating, not being genuine. The problem is, they might be right, or the colleague might simply be an outgoing, naturally friendly person with nothing hidden at all. But at that point, their brain has lost the ability to distinguish between these possibilities, because once the nervous system decides there is a threat, it begins searching for evidence to confirm it and ignores everything that contradicts it. In clinical psychology, this is the point where hypervigilance, a state of chronic alertness, no longer functions as a protective tool, but as a filter that distorts reality. And the most frightening part is not that they might be wrong. The most frightening part is that they cannot tell that they are wrong, because a nervous system operating in that state has no mechanism for self-checking. It has only one mode: keep scanning, keep analyzing, keep searching for threats. This is where the real cost begins to reveal itself most clearly, not in relationships with strangers, but in the closest ones. A partner replies an hour later than usual, and in their mind, a cascade of scenarios begins to run. A close friend suddenly becomes busier for a few weeks, and they begin to wonder if they did something wrong, if the relationship is starting to crack. Not because there is evidence, but because their nervous system learned long ago that even the smallest changes in the environment must be treated as potential danger signals. And they know this is happening. That is the most painful part. They can see themselves analyzing a completely normal situation and recognize that their reaction does not match reality. But knowing that does not help them stop, because this is not a problem of awareness, it is a problem of the nervous system. And the nervous system does not change simply because you understand why it works the way it does. This is exactly the moment when the most important question must be asked. Not, how do I live better with this ability? Not, how do I control it more effectively? But, is this truly an ability? Or is it an unhealed wound being called by a more appealing name? And if the answer is the latter, that does not mean you are weak. It does not mean what you perceive has no value. It simply means that there is a part of you that deserves to be healed, not so you lose this ability, but so it is no longer the only thing standing between you and the ability to truly live in the present. If you've listened this far and recognize yourself in what's been described, the feeling of always seeing more than others see, always carrying truths no one asked you to hold, always understanding others more deeply than they understand you, then there is something I want to say to you directly. Not, you're not alone. Not, appreciate this gift. Those phrases sound good, but they don't reach what you're actually feeling. What I want to say is this. There is a profound difference between seeing through the world and actually living in it. And if this ability is making you good at observing other people's lives, but unable to fully be present in your own, then that is not strength at work. That is a defense mechanism at work. And those two things may look the same from the outside, but they feel completely different from the inside. Healing does not mean becoming someone who no longer sees what others miss. It does not mean becoming naive, easily deceived, or losing the depth you have built. Healing in the true psychological sense means your nervous system learns to distinguish between the past and the present, between environments that were once unsafe and environments that may now be safe, if you allow them to be. It begins with a very small question you can ask yourself in the most ordinary moments when you are analyzing a simple message, when you are decoding a gesture that carries no real concern, when you are preparing for a worst-case scenario that shows no signs of happening. The question is, what I'm reacting to, is it happening now, or is it reminding me of something that happened before? You won't always have an immediate answer, but simply asking that question is the first step in a very important process. The process of teaching your nervous system that the present is not always the same as the past, that not everyone is a threat that needs to be decoded, that sometimes a gesture of care is simply a gesture of care without hidden meaning, without conditions, without a trap behind it. And if you read that and feel a part of you doesn't believe it, that is exactly the part that needs the most attention. Not to be judged, not to be forced to change, but to be seen, to be understood, and for the first time to be asked, how long have you been carrying this alone? Because in the end, the ability to see through others only truly becomes a strength when you also learn to see through yourself, not to analyze, not to control, but to truly notice the part of you that is exhausted and allow it to rest.